I'm Roberta Winters, President of the League of Women Voters, and I'm very glad you are among the pioneers with us this evening. We'll be hearing first this evening from Regina Mauro of the U.S. Census Bureau, followed by John Nagle, longtime League of Women Voters member and former Radnor Commissioner. Let me begin tonight by thanking Anne-Marie Hessman, our communications point person, for helping to make this endeavor possible. She continues to work her magic behind the scenes as a host for this evening's Zoom event. It is now my pleasure to welcome Regina Mauro, Partnership Specialist in Delaware County for the U.S. Census Bureau. I have been fortunate to work with her as part of the Delaware County Complete Count Committee and to help build bridges with key constituent leaders in our township. She comes to her position with us this evening having a breadth of diverse experiences, including teachers. I'm sure her expertise will be evident as she now begins to share with us just why the 2020 census matters. Thank you, Ms. Mauro.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you all about the 2020 census and the importance to our community in Radnor. So what I'd like to do, I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to start sharing the screen. All right. So what I'd like to do is first give you a census overview. And I will do that by using one of the public service announcements, one of the PSAs that the census has. They have it up on their YouTube channel. I could talk about the background of the census, but I really wanted you to see the type of marketing product that they have put out and just how simple, what a great way they have of explaining the census.
What is the 2020 census? Every 10 years, the census records everyone living in this country. It's written in the Constitution and comes in a questionnaire that counts everyone who lives at your address on April 1st. The data can be used to inform funding for services like fire stations, schools, clinics, and representation that affect your community.
How will 2020 census data be used? Where there are more people, there are more needs for public services. That's why the census is used by the government to inform funding decisions each year. But that's not all. It's also used by nonprofits to inform services, by businesses to create jobs, and even by students for school projects. Understanding how the population changes helps us shape communities across the country for the better.
How does the 2020 census affect representation? There are 435 seats in the House of Representatives. These get distributed to the 50 states by population, and an accurate census response helps your state get the right amount of seats. States with smaller populations get at least one, while states with larger populations might get more.
How do I take the 2020 census? In March 2020, every address in the country will receive an invitation to complete a simple questionnaire, and there are 3 ways to respond. Number 1, do it online. Number 2, call by phone. Number 3, send it by mail. For those who don't respond, a census taker from your community will follow up and assist you.
Is my 2020 census data safe? After sending your census response, your personal information is kept safe. By law, it can't be shared with any other government agency, law enforcement, or landlord. No one. So take your 2020 census with peace of mind. Shape your future. Start here. Visit 2020census.gov.
Okay, so given all that, what is our biggest challenge? And our biggest challenge is people who do not respond. So who are they, where are they, and why don't they respond? Who? There have been numerous studies to try to figure out if there is any commonality between groups of people that don't respond. One particular report was published January last year, BAMS, Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators Study, where they looked at exactly who is not responding, why don't they, and what would have motivated them to respond. What they found was, and I'm going to list a group of different demographics that normally tend to respond, they have lower response rates. Foreign-born residents, people in low-income households, the undocumented population, those who do not speak English well, the homeless, renters, and renters is big. I'll be going over renters a bit in more detail. Those without internet access, highly mobile groups, select rural areas, and the last two are actually related. Children under 5 tend to be undercounted in great numbers, and young heads of household between 18 to 34. The reason they are tied together is because most of the parents of children under 5 tend to be in the 18 to 34 year old range. Where are many of these non or low rate responders? Now, this is a map of Delaware County. See? It's color coded. The darker the color, the lower the expected response rate. And you see how we have some areas here. There's Chester, there's Upper Darby area. We're somewhere around here. Non-response concerns really exist throughout the county to varying degrees. This is where we are. This is Radnor Township. One thing that I would like to point out, that even though you may find proximity or similar color in the different census tracts, it doesn't mean we have equal demographics, which in turn means the challenges may be different. The ways of the messages that we emphasize to each community may be different. Those are the two tracks that I had highlighted in the previous slide. On the left, we have a portion of Wayne. On the right, there's a portion of Bryn Mawr. We had about 19% here on the left that were not expected to respond on their own versus about 17%. So they're pretty equal. They both had equal shades on the map. However, and I underlined the ones, the demographics where they differ the most. On the left, the median age is about 21.5, and on the right is about 43 years old. Now remember that the younger the head of household, the lower the chances are that they are going to respond. Poverty level, you have 14% versus 5%. Children under 18 living in poverty, 21 versus not even 2%. Asian, foreign-born, and households that do not speak English well. You compare the two, you see that we have a significantly higher Asian population in Bryn Mawr, as well as foreign-born. The reason I highlight Asian is because part of that study, I happen to be Hispanic, and for some reason I expected Hispanics to be the ones that would not respond to it as much as other groups. But in fact, it turns out that Asians are the ones that tend to respond the least. No computing device, it doesn't happen to be an issue, but it is something to keep in mind because, as I will share later again, this is the very first decennial where we are inviting people to respond online. So that's part of the message, and we need to be aware that when we talk to the community about that, we have to be conscious that there is still a segment of the population that does not even have internet access. For them, we have been partnering with all the local libraries, and they've done a great job. Right now, obviously, they cannot do it because of social distancing, but they, up until the stay-at-home order, they have done a phenomenal job at inviting people to come in to use their computer equipment. Why don't they respond? It's a combination of three things. They don't know how easy it is, how safe, or how important. Let's talk about how easy it is. It only has 9 questions. A lot of people think of the word survey and they imagine something way lengthier and more complicated, when in fact it's only 9 questions. And questions are very basic. If you were to do it online, which is what we strongly encourage, we're talking, it's pretty much, fill in the blanks. It asks, except for your name, it asks for your name, your date of birth, your race, sex, ethnicity, who lives in the house most of the year, that's who has to be on the form. Same questions for those persons, and how are they related? So if I have, my husband lives with me, I would answer the same demographic questions for him. And if I happen to have a girlfriend that lives with us most of the year, I would say, so we just say that she's unrelated. It is available in several languages. So it's available in English, and there's 12 non-English questionnaires. If the person's questionnaire is not in a language that they primarily speak, there's another 52 language guides that they can utilize to put side by side and be able to fill out the one in English. It can be completed via internet, telephone, or mailed. Safe, and this is safety, and this is the one that has made a lot of has had a lot of publicity. People with concerns about the safety and confidentiality of the information. Title 13 requires the Census Bureau to keep all information confidential and protected. Other government agencies or landlords, remember I mentioned I would be talking a little more about renters. Other government agencies or landlords do not have the legal right to access it. So the Census Bureau cannot share with other agencies information, personal information from people. We share statistics, we share numbers. We don't share identities. Similarly, landlords, which is a huge concern for renters. Why is it a concern? Some renters feel that if they were to disclose information of who lives in the household to the Census Bureau, that the landlords would somehow gain access to that information. And if they gave the impression that more than X amount of people, number of people are living in the dwelling, they're concerned that the landlord may evict them. So for that reason, they tend to either not fill out the census or underreport the people that live in the house. Now, what about census employees? Any census employee, it could be a census taker, it could be myself, we all took an oath. But the very first day that we start working for the census, we take an oath. We know the implications of violating these provisions. We would be subject to up to $250,000 in fines and up to 5 years in prison. So regardless, needless to say, there is absolutely no incentive for anybody to be sharing personal information. To close any possible loopholes, by law, responses cannot be used against a person by any government, at any court, for any reason. Important. I have to say, this is the area, and I thought I knew it all, and I obviously did not. Before I started working for the census, I did not know how important it was. I was aware of how it determines our voice in Washington, the state's political representation in Washington. But I have to confess that it was never incentive enough to treat it with the urgency that I should have. So I was one of those that ended up getting the door knock because I did not respond on my own. This is what I found till today. Today I was talking to a pastor down in Chester, and I shared what I'm going to share with you right now. He equally thought that he knew all there was to the census and that it was important, but he did not realize that hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funds are allocated to the states, and it is based on the decennial count. So these are hundreds of billions of dollars that are being funneled down. Eventually they reach our communities. So what ends up happening is when we have people that don't respond, we're given the impression that the population is smaller than it is. So in essence, we're saying, for instance, if we end up as a township, then as a county, if we contribute to an undercount to Pennsylvania, and it causes Pennsylvania to underreport by 10%, in essence, Pennsylvania is telling Washington, there's only 9 people here. So the government would turn and say, okay, here's money for 9 people, but you have 10 people to take care of. And that's the type of message, as simple as it gets, that we need to communicate to residents in our communities. You don't respond, you're going to be undercounted, we're going to be underfunded. Another reason why it's important is community planning for important public services, whether it's hospitals, schools, or roads. City planners rely on census information, on the counts from census information to see trends, to determine, you know what, based on what we found from the census, by the year 2024, it looks like we're going to have to expand this section of road because the population is growing disproportionate to what it has, the way it's been growing in other areas of the community. It may look somewhere else and say, you know what, we find that there are more people, more retirees coming to this area. We don't have our hospitals or healthcare services are not adequately funded, staffed, resourced to be able to serve the needs of a more senior community. So what happens is when people don't respond, we don't find their age, we don't find who they are, we don't find they exist to begin with. So we're going to be undercounted, and that means we're going to be under-resourced for a decade. Because remember, this is the decennial. The count is what determines funding, not just for 2020, but for a decade. So it's 10 times more critical. Another reason why it's important is business planning for products and services. Businesses use census information. It's available online. I myself have owned a couple of small businesses in the past, and I would access census information to find out where my clients were. One of the services catered to, it was a college screening service for high school juniors and seniors. So I would look for segments of the population that tended to have a higher representation of that demographic. Non-responders means you're going to be undercounted, your area, and you're going to be underserviced. Along the lines of business planning to offer services, think of, for example, a retailer trying to determine where they should put the next store. So this could also have an economic impact on the community, an immediate impact in the way of jobs that could potentially come in because we're actually showing the growth of our population. Stay informed, share information. 2020census.gov has enormous, just a treasure of information. You can get refreshments on why it's easy, safe, and important to respond. Keep on top of what's new for 2020 census. Important dates and what to expect, and this is what you can share. Between March 12th and the 20th is a household began receiving detailed information. It came in the form of an invitation on how to respond to the 2020 census. After that initial one, there are 4 subsequent reminders if you don't respond. You may respond, let's say, to the second one, and in between you did get the 3rd reminder, maybe that it got crossed in the mail. But the sooner you respond, the sooner the subsequent mailing stop, and then you can ensure, again, that census takers will not be coming around to get your information. After 5 mailings, census takers begin visiting homes that haven't responded. Be prepared to answer questions and address any concerns, everything that you've learned here, okay? So with that, I conclude. I thank you again to the League of Women Voters for the support of the 2020 census. Roberta has been an invaluable asset to this effort for us in Delaware County, and particularly in Radnor Township. So, #Delco counts.
I would like now to turn it over to John Nagle, who will share with you what he foresees to be the impact of the census data on our reapportionment, redistricting, and drawing of the ward lines in Radnor Township. As you may be aware, the League of Women Voters has been working for decades to address gerrymandering and its impact on the value of our vote. As a citizen, League member, and former elected commissioner in Radnor Township involved with drawing the lines for our wards, John has a unique perspective. So it is now my honor to welcome him to this evening's program. John, it's your turn.
Thank you, Roberta. I found this extremely interesting. Also, back in the 90s census, my wife worked as an enumerator. She was making a career change and did that in there. It was, and like you said, she had to go back to some houses 6 and 8 times. So anyway, as far as the census and the role in redistricting, if you look at the law, ward boundaries are drawn based on population, not on voter registration. So the census becomes the key input for completing that task. The township is divided up into census tracts. I think Regina referenced them when she was talking about some of the areas in Radnor that were not as responsive. So those census tracts are small. I don't know how many. They're probably more than 100. They're drawn based on physical boundaries, such as streets or streams, for that matter. So what we did is the last time we started out by we tried a clean slate approach. We had hired a lady, and I must apologize, her name's escaping me now, but she had worked with the league in the past when we challenged Pennsylvania's gerrymandering, and said, just do it. And the first map she came back with resulted in at least 3, maybe 4 of the current commissioners no longer being in the districts that they represented. So we stepped back and said, okay, what's another approach? And we looked at the historical approach, which had always been to use the existing map and stretch the boundaries here and there until you could equalize things. A problem with that is one of the goals is you want people with common interest to be in the same, at least same precinct, if not same ward. So we figured that was the better way to go, and we established some guidelines. So one of the things we wish to accomplish, of course, was the even distribution of population. Ultimately, we were successful with that. I think the wards are with plus or minus 5% from the smallest to the largest. We wanted to make sure we, to the extent practicable, we didn't break up areas of common interest, neighborhoods, if you will. We also looked at the colleges. As you all know, Radnor's got a large number of colleges with a lot of students. Students are counted during the census based on their college address. So we wanted to try to distribute the colleges and the college students over many of the wards rather than what had been in the past was only perhaps 2 wards. The reason for that is that college students, as a rule, do not vote except in presidential elections. And this leads to distorted wards when you don't have many, when you have a lot of people that don't vote. There are a couple things that became barriers, things we had to overcome, and I don't know whether we overcame them successfully. One was the fact that precincts, not wards, but precincts must have the same, the people must have the same state representative. I'll give you an example. More than half of the wards in Radnor are split between 2 state representatives, either the 166th district, which is currently Great Vitale, or Jennifer has the 165th, Jennifer O'Mara. So that's a barrier per se, or a rule that we had to follow. Second was we had to follow census tracts. So we couldn't split a census tract. Now, we were told that it was possible, but there was a very involved process you needed to do for that. I remember the census tracts generally were based on streets, streams, those types of things. I'll give you a couple examples of how that played out. In my old ward, the 5th ward, we have 2 precincts. The 5-1 is Greg Vitale's, and 5-2 is O'Mara. So, but 5-1 is probably half the size of 5-2. So what we looked at first was expanding 5-1 towards Garrett Hill, because Garrett Hill was also represented by Greg Vitale. So we had that rule covered. The problem was the way the census tracts were laid out. We would have ultimately had to go to the center of Garrett Hill, splitting that neighborhood. We did not want to do that, so we didn't. What we did is we found some houses on the edge of between 7 and 5 that we could move into 5-1. Made it a little larger, but still it's significantly smaller than 5-2. This also meant that 5-2 had to add people so that the entire ward was in balance with the rest of the community. So 5-2, we ended up moving the line into the 4th ward. So for example, Ithan Woods, Hills of Brim 4 were moved into 5-2. The voting place for 4 at that time for that precinct was Ithan Elementary School. So now what we do is the people from 4 actually leave their ward to go vote. And that's not really unusual, but it's confusing, especially to the folks in Ithan Woods that used to walk up to the school and vote. Another example is the 2nd ward. The way that worked out is we enlarged 2nd ward, and because we had to be concerned about Cabrini, Eastern, and Valley Forge, we ended up with a situation in which a small part of the added ward did not have the same representative. So therefore, we created a 3rd precinct, because 2-1 and 2-2 both are 166, Greg Vitale. So these new folks that we pulled in had Jen O'Mara. So we now have 3 precincts. The interesting part of that is because that precinct includes the colleges, we've had as little as 20 votes in that precinct on some elections. And the poll still has to be staffed, and you have to have your contact people there and your judge of elections. So that's that's not favorable, and we hope to be able to correct that. The 1st, 3rd, and 6th wards, what happened with those is each time we tried to adjust one of them, the way it pushed the others. Anyway, it became a real balancing act. But ultimately, we've made most people happy. We've now had to sort out voting places, and some of those are changing. Part of the problem there, of course, was when Sulpizio Gym was closed down for a while, and when the library was under renovation. But we'll work through all of those. So I hope that's helped you understand just how important the census is, that it counts people accurately. I hope to be able to get some of the census tracts modified to give us more fine control, if you will. So that kind of wraps it up.
Well, I would like to thank Regina for all her insights tonight, and for John for sharing the behind the scenes work at how those numbers play out into how our wards are divided, and Anna Marie for working her magic behind the scenes as our hostess. All of us who are voters and involved with the political processes in Radnor and beyond really know that that census information is vital in understanding how our vote counts. So thank you again this evening, and we wish you all the best as you try to stay healthy and keep well. Thank you.